people over power. I urge my colleagues to vote against this divisive impeachment and realize that dividing America will not save this republic. I urge my colleagues to not simply vote for what feels good. Of course, it feels good for the Democrats to have a united constituency for a few more days. But I was elected to come here and vote for things that actually do good, to bring much needed help to the American people. I am willing to take the first step and extend my hand across the aisle to say, vote against impeachment. Vote in favor of a unified nation, and I will forsake partisanship and work with you, no matter who you are or what party you come from. Madam Speaker, I urge that we all vote to finally put America first. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to a new member of the House and a new member of the Judiciary Committee. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jones.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the impeachment of Donald J. Trump, the disgraced, defeated President of the United States. There must be consequences for last week's treason and sedition. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Donald Trumps in today's Republican Party aim to run for higher office, and we must send a message that no one in the United States of America is above the law. The world is watching, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, 1 week ago, the President of the United States incited a deadly attack on the United States Capitol while a couple of dozen members of this House and I covered ourselves in that gallery away from the Trump mob. 5 dead, including Capitol Police. If inciting an insurrection does not warrant impeachment, nothing does. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Today, I vote to uphold my oath.
The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Excuse me, Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to strongly object to the articles of impeachment proposed against President Trump, which make the preposterous claim that President Trump wanted or expected the riots that took place last week. He clearly said he wanted peaceful and patriotic demonstration. He did say he wanted people to fight like hell or we're not going to have a country anymore, but that's obviously standard hyperbole and was not meant to aim at physical fights. But what is offensive is what you are saying and inflammatory about the tens of thousands of peaceful protesters who were there last week, as well as the tens of millions of people they represent. You don't understand why they were here. They're scared to death we're going to go back to the days without Donald Trump of hundreds of thousands of people crossing this border every month. They're scared to death nobody's going to keep our manufacturing here. They're scared to death that nobody else will fight the cancel culture as we head towards an era when some things can't be said. They're scared to death that a majority party got here by teaming up with Black Lives Matter, a bunch of founded by Marxists and that dislike the family.
The gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
Reserve.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today determined to fulfill our sacred oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Last week's violent insurrection on the Capitol is a stain on our democracy. A riotous mob, incited by the President, stormed these very halls, beat and murdered police officers, planted pipe bombs, and left our nation shocked and in mourning. The President's rhetoric, actions, and refusal to accept responsibilities are an imminent threat to our nation. I vote to impeach the President. I urge my colleagues to do the
gentleman's
same.
time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamurthy.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, my parents brought me as an infant to America because they knew it's the land of democracy. It's the beacon of hope for all the world. We called it the American dream. When Donald Trump told rioters to go to the Capitol and, quote unquote, fight like hell, he incited an attack on the Capitol and the ideals comprising the American dream. I'm voting for impeachment because I know we're still the country my parents believed in, and I will fight like hell for it. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence.
The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Chair, on Wednesday the 6th, Democrats and Republicans hid on the floor, put on gas masks, and was ushered out of this room. We in this country cannot begin healing in unity without accountability and justice. The President of the United States incited a violent insurrection against Congress, you, me, and the Vice President of the United States. This cannot be ignored. Impeach now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York continues to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, on January 6, Donald Trump incited his white nationalist supporters to initiate an attempted coup against the heart of our democracy, the United States Capitol. This heinous act of domestic terrorism demands that Congress act to remove this president. Donald Trump has been and remains a threat to our national security and our democracy, and wholly unfit to serve as president. He and his supporters must be held accountable for inciting violence against the government of the United States. Congress must act immediately to remove this clear and present danger to our country. It's time to impeach Donald Trump again.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Taylor Greene.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I am against the impeachment effort by the Democrats. President Trump has held over 600 rallies in the last 4 years. None of them included assaulting police, destroying businesses, or burning down cities. Democrats have spent all this time endorsing and enabling violent riots that left billions in property damage and 47 dead across the United States. Democrats are on record supporting violence when it serves their cause, in their own words, on social media, on interviews, and on fundraising platforms. Act Blue. Democrats support defunding the police when it's someone else's city, someone else's home, and someone else's business. Democrats will take away everyone's guns just as long as they have guards with guns. Democrats' impeachment of President Trump today has now set the standard that they should be removed for their support of violence against the American people. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, for 2 months, Donald Trump used the biggest megaphone in the world to organize a campaign of outright lies to overturn a free and fair election. On January 6th, he summoned and incited a mob of domestic terrorists to fight like hell and sent them to ransack this Capitol in order to prevent us from formalizing his election loss. It was a grotesque orgy of deadly white supremacism, anti-Semitism, and strongman rule. Today, we will do our duty and vote to remove the author of this horrifying chapter and banish him from public service. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, can I inquire on the time again?
The gentleman from Ohio has 20 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from New York has 21 3/4 minutes remaining.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Levin.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, what each of us chooses to do today, whether we vote to hold this president to account or look the other way, will we be remembered by history, by our children and their children. The facts are clear. The evidence of Trump's insurrection overwhelming. History calls on us to do what's right rather than just politically expedient. Let us look back on this day with honor, not disgrace, knowing we were up to the oath we all took. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Luria.
The gentlewoman from Virginia is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, the perpetrators of this heinous attack on our nation's democracy were Americans, encouraged and emboldened by President Trump because he could not accept the outcome of a free and fair election. His actions are seditious, and the president has proven that he is not fit to serve. History will look back on this moment to see who stood strong in support of American democracy. As my colleagues have said, we must come together, but our nation cannot begin to heal until there is accountability.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
For the atrocity.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
The gentleman from Georgia, is it?
Yep, gentleman from Georgia, 1 minute.
Is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the effort to impeach President Trump. This course of action will only increase dissent and disunity across our country, and it flies in the face of all efforts to heal our nation. Quite simply, it is a shameful final act of political retribution, retribution this president has weathered since day one. I have no doubt that those who breached the Capitol will have due process and their day in court. However, there will be no investigation in the People's House into whether the allegation against the president meets the criteria for a crime worthy of impeachment. No evidence was presented, no witness testified, no cross-examination was conducted, no due process was afforded, and that sets an extremely dangerous precedent for the future. If my Democratic colleagues were serious in their efforts to get to the truth, they would convene the House Judiciary Committee and investigate, but they are not. And so I am proud to stand before you today to defend our president from the injustices my Democratic colleagues are so giddy to pursue. I oppose this effort to impeach the president and ask all members of the House to do the same. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise with a heavy heart for what our nation has endured. All those who've incited an attack on these halls of freedom must never forget that in every generation, Americans of all colors and creeds have laid down their lives in the struggles against tyranny, the fight against fascism, and the defense against those who would betray the values upon which this nation was founded. It is our duty to shoulder that defense of our democracy here today. The president's actions have laid bare his contempt for our Constitution, and he must be removed.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to
We reserve.
reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
The armed insurrectionists that stormed the Capitol did not emerge out of a vacuum. They were lied to by Republican senators and Republican congressmen and women. But they were incited to violence by one man above all else, Donald J. Trump, who tried to be the ultimate ruler of our democracy. The world is watching. Our allies are watching, and our adversaries are watching. And we must show them that no one will rule this country and be above the law. The cameras of history are rolling. We must act. We must impeach Donald
The
J.
gentleman's
Trump to
time
show
has
the world
expired.
that we will stand for
The
right.
gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Utah.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last Wednesday, on my third day, I realized that I can make hard and seemingly unpopular decisions. Voting to strip Electoral College votes from states is a dangerous precedent, set by Democrats many years ago, perpetuated by my party as well. I heard nothing in those debates that justified such a high bar. A rushed impeachment will set a similar precedent. Without a single hearing or investigation, I simply cannot reach the high bar of impeachment. To my district, I commit to constantly being objective in all of my decision making. And as I abandon the remainder of my remarks, as I listen to this debate, it's no wonder our nation is divided. We are on an absolute race to the bottom. And I was hoping that last week we could have hit rock bottom. I commit to doing better, and I hope that we all can dig in and find a way. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Beatty.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. Domestic terrorists attacked our democracy, urged on by a sitting president. These insurrectionists believe Donald Trump's lies about the stolen election. They obeyed his call to attack. They literally carried his banner while storming the Capitol. Last week's insurrection was shocking and tragic. It was a culmination of 4 years of assaults on our democracy. We must impeach this president, and the Congressional Black Caucus stands ready to join in a bipartisan message to the likes of Donald Trump.
Expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore.
The gentlewoman from Wisconsin is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, the president radicalized American citizens, and as his vice president fled from a lynch mob, the speaker cowered while people died. He watched with glee. That is why, even though it's only 7 days before the end of his term, we have the fierce urgency of now. 7 days is too long for him to be in power. He could declassify state secrets. He could monetize national secrets to foreign adversaries, and he could even pardon.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
The person.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise with great sorrow to oppose this second attempt at a baseless impeachment from my Democrat colleagues. This week's attack on the U.S. Capitol was completely unacceptable, and the people involved should be met with swift accountability. The president didn't incite a riot. The president didn't lead an insurrection, and there are no high crimes and misdemeanors requisite of an impeachment. I'm not saying the president didn't exercise poor judgment, but to criminalize political speech by blaming lawless acts on the president's rhetoric is wrong, Madam Speaker, and a very dangerous precedent. The criminals who stormed the Capitol that day acted on their own volition. They are responsible for their actions. This is an important moment, Madam Speaker, for our nation. We have the opportunity to come together and do what's right for our country. The votes are certified. President Trump has conceded. Let's focus on the future and get back to the people's business. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. Yes. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Newman.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to speak today. So today I stand with this body to impeach this president. I agree with my Democratic colleagues. I also agree with my Republican colleagues. Let's unite. Let's unite to address this pandemic and start by simply wearing a mask. Let's unite to bring back the economy and start by putting $2,000 checks in people's pockets. And let's unite to hold these domestic terrorists accountable and impeach this president. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, could you, how much time do I have, please?
The gentleman from New York has 18 and 1/4 minute, and the gentleman from Ohio, 17 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much. I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today at a time of historical concern. Last week on this very House floor, an attack on democracy, that symbol. But it was an attack from within this very floor. Let's be clear. Cause and effect. Rally at the White House, march down Pennsylvania Avenue, a parade in reverse, and an attack to this chamber. A police officer was killed. And what I hear is time to heal. He's not even buried yet. It's clear and present danger. No one is above the law. Not the president if he has 4 years or 4 days. We must do the right thing for all Americans because he must be held accountable. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is
Thank you, Madam
recognized.
Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Sparks.
The gentlewoman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate a variety of opinions, but any accusations must go through the proper due process, whether it's election fraud or an impeachable offense. And someone who did not support the objection to certification last week, I will not support this political charade today. The rule of law and due process is vital to what our constitutional republic stands for. Congress should stop playing divisive politics and start working on delivering real good policies for the American people. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves his time. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr.
The gentleman
Panetta.
from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
A week ago was the culmination of carnage caused to our country by this president. 4 years ago, he said he would stop such devastation. Instead, the president has continued to debase our democracy with assaults on our elections and incitement at the ellipse and the battery at our Capitol. American exceptionalism is not guaranteed. We must always work to grow it, and that includes our work today to hold President Trump accountable. American carnage started with this president. A vote for impeachment will stop it for our posterity. I yield
The
back.
gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The U.S. Capitol has not been breached for over 200 years since the War of 1812. That is, until last week, when it wasn't another country that attacked us, but our own president. President Donald Trump asked his supporters to march on the Capitol, inciting domestic terrorism that cost 5 lives, including a Capitol police officer. And we all know, whether you say it aloud or not, Donald Trump is responsible for inciting the attacks in our democracy, that he should have been the one person protecting it the most. And for that, he is unfit to be president, and we must impeach him.
The gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 90 seconds to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is yielded 90 seconds.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio. The President of the United States deserves universal condemnation for what was clearly, in my opinion, impeachable conduct, pressuring the Vice President to violate his oath of the Constitution to count the electors. His open and public pressure, courageously rejected by the Vice President, purposely seeded the false belief among the president's supporters, including those assembled on January 6th, that there was a legal path for the president. It was foreseeable and reckless to sow such a false belief that could lead to violence and rioting by loyal supporters whipped into a frenzy. Unfortunately, my Democratic colleagues drafted articles that I believe are flawed and unsupportable, focusing on the legal terms of incitement and insurrection. Even noting impeachment does not require meeting a certain legal standard, that danger for open speech and debate in this body and for the Republic is high if the House approves the articles as written. The language will be used to target members of this body under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. It will be used to suggest that any statements we make are subject to review by our colleagues and send us down the perilous path of cleansing political speech in the public square. We must end this. Let us condemn that which must be condemned and do so loudly. But let us do it the right way, with deliberation and without disastrous side effects. We must end tearing apart our nation by social media and sound bites. Let us stop. Let us debate. Let us sit down and lead this nation together. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, this vote is not about one man, one party, or even one day. It's about protecting our nation, preserving democracy, and the rule of law. The facts are clear and undisputed. President Trump used a litany of lies about a stolen election and willfully incited an armed insurrection with the intent of stopping the peaceful transfer of power. He attacked not just the Capitol, not just Congress, he even attacked democracy itself. That's why he must be impeached.
The gentlewoman's time is
and I
expired.
yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Chairman, the President has engaged in conduct that is criminal, impeachable, and profoundly threatening to our democracy. He pressed state officials and members of this body to overturn an illegitimate election and to keep him in power. And he then invited and activated a violent mob to invade the Capitol and achieve his desired result by insurrection. If that is not impeachable conduct, I don't know what is. The President must be removed from office immediately and never allowed to hold office again. Our democracy
The gentleman's
requires
time
it.
has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last summer, the Antifa and BLM riots swept all over our country. Cities were burnt, businesses destroyed, and lives violently stolen. And it wasn't just for an afternoon like those horrible hours we had on January 6th, but rather they went on for weeks and in some cases even months. So if there's any silver lining in this dark cloud, it's that our friends from across the aisle have come to realize that riots are bad. We conservatives have known this all along. This snap impeachment is a sham, and it didn't go through the Judiciary Committee, and it's not even about the president's actual words, but it's about how our Democratic colleagues want to interpret his words and fashion a particular meaning to them. Now, this is just political grandstanding at its worst. The American people desperately want us to move on and tackle the issues and find solutions to them forthwith. Madam Speaker, let's end this obsession and charade, and let's get to work. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
Yeah, we reserve.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, now we hear talk of the President's notion of a peaceful transfer of power, which apparently means what? Minimal casualties? Now we hear talk of healing after the criminal acts are completed. Never as a criminal defense attorney did I say, Judge, yeah, my guy completed the armed robbery, but let's heal now. No, there was accountability. There was accountability then, there should be accountability now, and there should be impeachment now. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Reserve, Madam
The
Speaker.
gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from North Carolina, a new member of the committee, Ms. Ross.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the article of impeachment. The President's responsibility for the violence and insurrection that occurred last Wednesday cannot go unanswered. The President has had multiple opportunities to modify his behavior to bring this country together. Instead, he uses his power to further divide us. He is unrepentant. Congress must act for the good of this country. Madam Speaker, I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I stand today in support of President Trump and against this sham impeachment proceeding with literally 1 week, 7 days remaining in his term. This is merely the culmination of a 4-year effort to overturn the will of the people and the results for the 2016 election. This is simply a political action intended to tarnish the legacy of a highly successful president who led us to an incredible economy, energy independence, reduction of taxes for millions, regulatory relief for businesses, renewed peace in the Middle East, and stronger border security. This action will only serve to further offend the 75 million people who voted for President Trump and further deepen the division within our nation as we try to move forward with a peaceful transition of power. However, the Democrat majority has determined he's already guilty and there's no need of a trial, and they therefore move forward quickly with this phony impeachment charge. Today, I join my Republican colleagues in standing against this further effort to divide our nation. Thank you, and I yield back.
And yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the impeachment. It's very simple. What we saw on January 6th was a person, the President of the United States, incite a crowd to come and attack the Capitol. We have to make sure that we stand up for democracy. If we don't do this, then what are we going to stand for? We stand for democracy, we stand for American values, and I stand for the impeachment of Donald Trump. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 30 seconds.
On January 6th, President Trump launched an attack against the United States Capitol. I too urge my colleagues to unite, but to unite in love of country and to hold this president accountable. What unites our country is respect for the rule of law. Without accountability for those who would shatter the rule of law by overturning a presidential election, we cannot take seriously the cries of being a united people. This president remains a serious threat to our country and must be held accountable.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized, and he chooses to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me make everybody aware that on those just sun-bleached bones of history of many great nations are written those pathetic words, too late. They moved too late to save their great nations. Let us not this day move too late to save our great nation.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Speaker, I rise today for two reasons. One, to voice my strong opposition for the impeachment of this president with 7 days left. I also want to voice my support for the strong police department. Many of you want to defund. Where was your cries to defund when you were leaving this office, this very room, last on the 6th? Height of hypocrisy. I yield back.
Members are kindly reminded to remind yourself to address your remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
We do, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Ironic. An administration begins by building an unnecessary wall on our southern border. It ends by making necessary a new wall around this Capitol. I introduced articles of impeachment in July of 2017 with one co-sponsor, Al Green, and again in January of 2019. And on Monday night, I joined with so many of us in introducing these articles. I've introduced articles of impeachment in the 115th, 116th, and 117th Congress because Donald Trump has continuously posed a danger to this republic.
The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise with a very simple question. On January 6th, thousands broke the law by taking siege of our Capitol here with us inside. Has any one of those individuals who brought violence on this Capitol been brought here to answer whether they did that because of our president? It appears I will receive no answer. I will yield my time back to the gentleman from Ohio.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve his time. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 30 seconds.
Donald Trump is the first president in the history of this republic to incite a violent insurrection against our own government, against our own people. It is a shocking betrayal of his oath of office and our American values. We don't know yet if the president will face criminal charges, but we do know he must be held to account. Each one of us in this House took an oath to protect and defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, even if that enemy is the president. We must move forward as a nation from these darkest days, but we can't move forward without accountability. We must impeach this president. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves, and the gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Chair, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Stevens.
The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized for 30 seconds.
Insurrection, a violent mob. A week ago today, 5 people were killed, many injured, and everyone in this building forced to hide for their very life. The president was called for help, but he did not answer our call while our government was being taken over. He failed to lead and therefore proved himself incapable of doing so. Some may say impeachment is political. Some may cry it is divisive. But, Madam Speaker, our obligation to our Constitution is anything
The time's
but.
expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the impeachment of President Donald Trump. The gravity of the moment demands it, and the fate of our republic depends on it. He committed an impeachable offense by inciting a violent and deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. For this, Congress must hold him accountable to preserve our democracy, our Constitution, and the rule of law. He should serve not 1 minute more and be barred forever from public office. He is toxic to our republic and toxic to our democracy. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So Democrats can say, quote, I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, while there are uprisings happening around the country. But they impeached the President of the United States for saying peacefully and patriotically, make your voices heard. Democrats can say, quote, you know, there needs to be unrest in the streets, while there is unrest in the streets. But they're going to impeach the President for saying peacefully and patriotically, make your voices heard. Let's be consistent, all of us. All of us need to be consistent and condemn the violence all the time. And with that, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New Mexico.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to these articles of impeachment. Political violence has no place in our constitutional republic, and those who assaulted police officers and forced their way into the Capitol are responsible for their criminal actions. Leaders in both parties have a responsibility to condemn such violence, whether in the halls of Congress or in the streets of America. I don't believe, Madam Speaker, that the American people have an appetite for this. They are expecting us to do the will of them, those who sent us from each state around the nation. Right now, Madam Speaker, we've seen this body impeach once before, trying to do it a second time. Two wrongs do not make a right. We have got to stand for the American people because we will not get a second chance to get this right the first time. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
We do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to a new member, the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, the dangerous mob that Donald Trump unleashed on the United States Capitol represents a violent assault on the separation of powers and on the peaceful transfer of power that we have long taken for granted. The impeachment of Donald Trump is not politics but law, not passion but reason, not vengeance but justice. And we as the people's representatives must rise to the challenge of defending democracy in the face of its gravest threat, and we will. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Tran.
The gentlewoman from Massachusetts is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I stand before you today in disbelief. Disbelief that after the President incited a violent mob to commit an act of insurrection and remained silent as police officers were assaulted, the Capitol was ransacked, and members of this body fled for their lives, that there are still members of his party who refuse to hold him accountable. It's because of that inaction that there is only one path forward to put an end to this presidency. Donald Trump must be impeached, removed from office, and barred from ever holding the office of the presidency again. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves his time. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, Ms. Velasquez.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this resolution because in America, we hold power to account. In America, we do not succumb to violent insurrections incited by a head of state. In America, we do not turn a blunt eye to high crimes and misdemeanors. No, that is not who we are. So today, as a sworn defender of this nation's Constitution, I will vote in favor of impeaching Donald J. Trump. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could I again inquire the time remaining for each side?
The gentleman has 10 minutes remaining, and the gentleman for New York has 9 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Malone.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second annual impeachment show extravaganza, brought to you by the censors and left-wing media, the fact-checked ministers of shutdown and big tech, and the Democrat Party. Today, the second annual impeachment of President Trump isn't really about actual words spoken out of rally. No. This is all about, Madam Speaker, the unbridled hatred of this president. You use any extreme language and any process to oppose the core of what he has really fought for. You hate him because he is pro-life, strongest ever. You hate him for fighting for the freedom of our religion to not be persecuted by unfair mandates and limitations on speech. You hate him for not subscribing and shackling us with the religion of climate change and one-sided Paris Accords. You hate him for Israel. You hate him for defending our borders. You hate him for letting families and small businesses keep what they earn, for trying to keep the agents of government off their back. You hate him for putting America first, which is what I thought we do when we swear the oath. No, this shabby show isn't about a threat to our republic. This is the impeachment and muting of at least half of the American people. This is shameful and abuse of a process.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New
I yield
York.
the gentleman additional 20 seconds.
The gentleman from Ohio yields you
Madam
another
Speaker,
20 seconds. 30.
I pray people of all stripes wake up to this spectacle and exercise their rights to put a stop to it through free speech and through fair elections. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to support the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump for seditious acts against America. To overturn the 2020 presidential election, Trump incited a violent assault on Congress, a treasonous betrayal of our nation. This criminal incitement left us with 5 dead, including a police officer, a desecrated Capitol, and a second constitutional crisis. His acts show contempt for the rule of law, the Constitution, and the foundation of any democracy, a peaceful transition of power. President Trump is a clear and present danger to American lives and democracy, and he leaves us no choice but to immediately remove him from office. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio
Thank you, Madam
is
Speaker.
recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 90 seconds to the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Hirschberger.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee is yielded 90 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge my colleagues to vote against impeachment of our sitting President Donald J. Trump. You can tell the American people that this is a vote to impeach upon the grounds of inciting violence and insurrection, but the American people see a double standard. They see a standard implied to those on the left who commit violence, and they see a standard to those applied to the right who commit violence. The American people see this, and they understand it. I've been here all of 1 week, and what I see, instead of lawmakers who are truth seekers, I see lawmakers who are power seekers. And that's never good, never good. What a shame, what a shame. The American people are watching to see how their elected officials respond at this moment in history. Will you vote to mend, or will you vote to further divide this country? I'm urging you to use this opportunity to be the leaders the American people are seeking for such a time as this. God help us as a nation, and I pray that God will keep his hand upon the greatest nation that the world has ever seen. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve his time.
We do, Madam.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, how much time do we have, please?
The gentleman from New York has 9 1/4 minutes. And Ohio has 8 minutes. The gentleman from Ohio, 8 minutes.
Thank you.
Gentleman from New York.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, President Trump's incitement to violently overturn the results of a free and fair election is an attack on our rule of law. Any president, any member of Congress who obstructs the Electoral College or attacks judges and the court system where there's no evidence to support their contentions undermines the public's trust and confidence in the judicial process. How do my Republican colleagues expect ordinary citizens to respect and trust the courts in civil and criminal matters all across this country? Think about that as you make this decision. Vote yes.
The gentleman's
on
time
the
has
article of
expired. The
impeachment.
gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York
Madam
is
Speaker, I yield
recognized.
30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Roybal Allard.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I take no joy in voting to impeach President Trump, but this president has blood on his hands in the wake of this attempted coup. The fact remains no president of the United States is above the law, and this president has sadly violated his oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. As members of Congress who have taken that same pledge, it is our duty to take this action and impeach this unfit and dangerous president. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. Cano.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
I'm voting to impeach because, as Lincoln said, no grievance is a fit object of redress by mob law. But we must recognize that our hard work begins to address the real grievances and despair in left-behind communities. To be worthy of this capital that we hold sacred, to fix our broken windows and broken communities, let's finally commit to investing trillions in creating good jobs in healthcare, in education, and infrastructure for communities and places that are hurting.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell.
The gentlewoman, Ms. Sewell, is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to support impeachment. I do so with a heavy heart and a lasting and searing memory of being in this gallery, the People's House, right up there, fearing for my life. And why? Because the President of the United States incited others to be violent, a mob of insurgencies in this House. It's unacceptable. It led to the killing of 5 Americans. Blood is on this House. We must do something about it. I ask that we move from stopping the steal to healing, but healing requires accountability, and everyone must be accountable. Who is that?
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I'm fairly new here. Actually, this is my first floor speech. But I rise to oppose this impeachment. You know, I asked my staff this morning, I said, how many times in our nation's history have we impeached a president? Well, they said up until this president, only 2 times in our nation's history. So here we are, 7 days left in his first term, and we're going to impeach a president for what reasons? For what reasons? There have been no hearings. There have been no committees. We must defend the right and protect the process of impeachment. If we pursue this, from now on, from this day forward, impeachment will always be a political process. I ask my friends across the aisle, they always talk about healing. Healing. How do we come together as a nation? Since 2016, there has been hashtags going around in our nation that said, not our president. Resist, resist. Members across the aisle have said things in public to have supporters of this president attacked and demeaned. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 30 seconds.
Last Friday, I sent a letter to my constituents telling the story about the violent attack on our Capitol building, which is really like the temple of our democracy. I have now taken the oath of office, the same oath of office that the President of the United States has taken, that all of us here have taken, and he has been the orchestrator of this attack. It is time to hold this president accountable. It is time, and history demands that we impeach
The gentlewoman's
Donald
time has
Trump for
expired.
the second
The
time.
gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We would reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes.
The gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 30 seconds.
The words have almost all been said. Search your soul, consider your oath. And I add 4 more words. Reflect on your legacy. My friends, which way is history flowing right now? Will Donald Trump join the pantheon of Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Reagan? Or will his 33% approval ratings and the condemnation of principled Republicans consign him to the heap of reviled demagogues with Joseph McCarthy and Andrew Johnson? Where he goes in history, you go in history, unless today you make a stand. I yield back.
Yields back. I would like to remind members to please direct their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Cowan.
The gentleman from Hawaii is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, as a member of our armed forces, now a member of Congress, I have taken and given the oath of office many times. I will support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. On January 6th, the President violated this oath, inciting violent and deadly insurrection. Our sacred oaths are hollow without accountability. We must hold this president accountable, remove him from office, ensure he can never hold public office again. I urge my colleagues to do the same. This oath has to matter. Mahalo, and I yield back.
New York. Recognized. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, this beautiful Capitol dome is a symbol of freedom and democracy, not just for Americans, but for people the world over. The action we take today, this impeachment, is a declaration to the world that when there is an attack on our democracy, whether it comes from without or whether, tragically in this instance, it comes from within, we will respond to that threat and attack, and we will do what's necessary to strengthen our democracy. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2.5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sickened and angered by what we all had to witness last Wednesday and call for the investigation and prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. Every single person who participated in the violence and loss of life in this Capitol building last Wednesday. I, as a member, sit here listening to the entire debate, desperately need to better understand the two standards that are at play in this House. Why is it okay if a House Democrat calls for violence in the streets, but not if you're a Republican? Why can a House Democrat be rewarded with a gavel and a chairmanship if they're calling for physical confrontation of a Trump administration official, but they will be punished if they're a Republican? The double standards that we have seen time and time again, I need to better understand what the rules are of this House. Why is it that a committee chairman can lie to the American public about having more than circumstantial evidence that the president colluded with the Russians in order to win the 2016 election. But of course, the Republicans can't and wouldn't lie to the American public about something like that. We need to better understand what these two standards are that are at play and to complete the record. Because the House Democrats are here to make President Trump the first president to be impeached twice. So I'll complete the record. First off, in the articles of impeachment, it's written that the president gave a speech and he told his supporters to come here and that he incited this riot. And one speaker after another here on the other side of the aisle have repeated that in the article of impeachment. But we all know that this was a pre-planned attack. We all know that there was pipe bombs being discovered while the president was speaking. We all know that the Capitol perimeter was being breached during the president's speech. We know that this was pre-planned and it started while the president was speaking. Why is that not in the articles of impeachment? Why is that not being incorporated into my colleague's remarks? To complete the record, if you want to make the president the first president to be impeached twice, well, we'll add something else to that. Thank you to the president for his efforts to defeat MS-13 in my district or to withdraw from the... Request 30 more seconds.
Fired. The gentleman yields an additional 30 seconds. Did I hear correct?
Yes.
The gentleman has another 30 seconds.
Thank you to the president for his efforts to move the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem and recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights and to take out Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and Qasem Soleimani, to eliminate the ISIS caliphate, to enter into the historic Abraham Accords, to have an economy this time last year that was stronger than I ever remember in my entire lifetime. Yeah, we'll complete the record. And in all fairness, as the president leaves 1 week from today, let's be honest about the double standards that exist inside of this chamber. And let's also be honest that this president did a lot to make America greater than ever.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston.
What happens
The
if
gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
What happens if we get this wrong is written in Lincoln's second inaugural, when one party would make war rather than let the nation survive. On December 7th, on September 11th, we came together against an enemy from without, but on January 6th, we were attacked by an enemy from within, the president who would make war with malice for all and charity for none. We must come together in unity today against that domestic threat to our Constitution. The alternative is too unbearable to contemplate. We must impeach, bipartisanly, unanimously, if you have the soul.
The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Fletcher.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of the article of impeachment and in opposition to the gaslighting that is masquerading as debate in this chamber today. I was in this chamber when the president assembled and unleashed a mob to attack the United States Capitol and the United States Congress, the elected representatives of the people. By doing so, he incited an insurrection against our representative democracy itself. If that is not an impeachable offense, then what is? Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In Michigan's 13th, we proudly speak truth to power, even in the face of a racist in chief. Those who incited an attack on the People's House do not get to talk about healing and unity. They have torn this country apart. They have stoked the fire and then handed the gasoline to Donald Trump. Dr. King once said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension. It is in the presence of justice." Today, we must embody those words, and we must understand that peace must be centered in truth and action.
We cannot sit, Madam Chair, sit idly by after a violent attempted coup and allow lies and hate to continue. Today, we stand up for our constituents who continue to be harmed by this oppressive
wishes to reserve. The
and vicious
gentlewoman's
ideology. Today, we
time has
impeach
expired.
Donald Trump.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. And the gentleman from New York has 3 3/4 minutes remaining. From Ohio has 4. And the gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What happened last Wednesday is an absolute tragedy. And not only are we part of dealing with it now, we were part of it then. But when emotions are frayed and tensions are this high, process matters more. It matters more now than it did before. And the reality is this: there are serious constitutional questions about these articles. And Donald Trump is going to be president until January 20th. And on January 20th, Joe Biden's going to become president. But I'll end with this. I'm going to vote against impeachment, and that's going to give me credibility at home with my base. You're going to vote for impeachment, and that's going to give you credibility at home with your base. It's easy to point at me and blame me. It's easy for me to point at you and blame you. But on January 21st, we're all going to be back here. So use that credibility. Go back and talk some hard truths to your people. I'm going to do it, and we need to do a better job. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Manning.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, this president has repeatedly lied to the American people about his election loss. He incited his followers to attack our democracy, resulting in 5 deaths. His dangerous efforts to derail the peaceful transition of power were a violation of his oath of office. This president is unfit to lead our nation and unable to discharge his duties of office. I call upon my Republican colleagues to speak the truth to their supporters and join me in holding President Trump accountable by voting to impeach. I yield.
New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Mervan.
I didn't hear where he was from. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, since the events on January 6th, I spoke with a group of ministers from Gary, Indiana, and they told me how they are praying for unity and justice in our nation. It reminded me of the moment when those of us who were on the House floor on January 6th were huddled together in a secure room after the attack. The House chaplain, Kiblin, led us all in prayer. Let us remember that moment. Let us rekindle that prayer for those 3 minutes when we were all united to preserve our democracy and justice. I support the article of impeachment so that we can move forward to do the work that our constituents sent us here to do. With that, I yield back.
Has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from New York has 2 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio has 3. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserved. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, there are more troops right now in Washington, D.C. than in Afghanistan. And they are here to defend us against the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, and his mob. I would ask my colleagues to look at the faces of those young Americans defending democracy, defending us, and find an ounce of their courage to do the right thing, as several Republicans have, and take a tough vote for the future of democracy, for the future of our
The
country.
gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vesey.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker,
let's be clear about one thing. If we were on the eve of a Republican president being sworn in, and his Democratic predecessor had said the same thing that this president said, and incited his followers, his mob, to descend up on the Capitol, we will be joining them, not making comparisons, because guess what? I don't care about no base. I care about this democracy and this country. And what happened the other day should never happen again. And we need to stand up and say and do the right thing.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the Republican whip is prepared to close for us whenever that is appropriate, so we'll reserve until that's time.
The gentleman reserves.
Madam Speaker,
The gentleman from New York.
I now yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 30 seconds.
I was on that floor just 1 week ago, and so today the insurrectionist in chief will be impeached for insurrection. It is because he failed to defend this nation against all enemies, domestic and foreign, and he stood down near the White House and told a mob of domestic terrorists to go and show your strength, be strong. You can't gain anything because of weakness. We must hold him accountable. We can heal this nation, but he must be impeached today. We must impeach Donald J. Trump as an
Gentlewoman's time has
insurrectionist
expired. The
to do
gentleman
that
from New
now.
York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve. The gentleman from New York.
Ask if they're prepared to close.
Is the other side prepared to close?
Yes.
Then,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker.
Yes.
I yield
the
3
gentleman
minutes.
from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the Republican whip, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the gentleman from Ohio for yielding. Madam Speaker, our nation still mourns the unacceptable violence and anarchy that took place in this Capitol last week. As we speak, arrests are still being made, and the anarchists who stormed our Capitol are being brought to justice, as should be the case. Emotions are still high, but in this moment, we need to be focused on toning down the rhetoric and helping heal this nation as we move towards a peaceful transition of power to President-elect Joe Biden next week. My prayers, Madam Speaker, are still with Capitol Police Officer Sieknick and Liebengood, who we lost, as well as all of the Capitol Police officers who risked their lives to keep us safe. They are true heroes, and they deserve all of our applause today. Madam Speaker, I've seen the dark evil of political violence firsthand, and it needs to stop. But all of us need to be unequivocal in calling it out every single time we see it, not just when it comes from the other side of the aisle. I oppose this rushed impeachment brought forward without a single hearing. And by the way, the Senate will not even take this up until President Trump is out of office. So let's keep that in mind. It will only serve to further divide a nation that is calling out for healing. Madam Speaker, many speakers today have invoked one of our nation's greatest leaders, President Abraham Lincoln. Maybe we should follow some of Lincoln's wisdom that he's imparted upon us in moments like this. As Abraham Lincoln was giving his second inaugural address in March of 1865, Lincoln issued us a challenge. This is what he said: "With malice toward none,
with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all our nations. Madam Speaker, in times like these, let us not reach out to our darkest demons, but instead, like Lincoln, seek the higher ground. May God bless this great United States of America. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we can have all this, but we have accountability too. I now yield our remaining time, 1 minute, to the distinguished Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Hoyer.
The majority of the leader is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman for yielding. This is a troubled time, a sad time. It is a time where all of us have stood almost to a person and lamented the violence and the assault on this Capitol and the assault on democracy itself. It was right to do that. But this impeachment ought to be put in the perspective of what the Republican chair of the Republican conference said it was. She said the President of the United States summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of that attack. There has never been, she said, a greater betrayal by a President of the United States of this office, of his office, and his oath to the Constitution. That is why we are here today. That is why we are here today, just a week before that president, at the request of the American people, will leave office. And the issue is, what do we do? The 433 of us, I believe, who are here, do on behalf of the American people to respond to what Representative Cheney described happened on the 6th of January. A mob assembled by, summoned by, and then spoken to light the flame of the attack. To stop the steal. As we sat here, exercising our constitutional duty, and to his great credit, the Vice President of the United States following the Constitution of the United States of America. Notwithstanding the fact that he was opportuned by the President not to do so. That mob sent by the President to stop the steal did so for a few hours. Not the steal, but the constitutional duty that we had. And so we ask ourselves, what do we do? What is our responsibility? What should we say in light of only the Civil War as an analogy? That doesn't mean there haven't been demonstrations in Washington before and demonstrations throughout this country before. But it is the first and only physical presence other than the 9/11 attack on this nation, which came from abroad. and had a plane aimed at our Capitol dome. This attack was not from abroad. It was, as Liz Cheney said, summoned, assembled, and inflamed by the President of the United States of America, who, in Liz Cheney, said words that there has never been a greater betrayal by a President of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. I pride myself as a member of this Congress who for 40 years has worked in a bipartisan fashion with many of your leaders, and do to this day. But are we to remain silent in the face of Liz Cheney's saying this was the greatest betrayal of the duty of the President of the United States in history? Are we to stand silent? Will we stand silent? Will we not stand up and say, this is not acceptable? Madam Speaker, for 4 years, Donald Trump has made no effort to hide his ambitions or his lacking of Republican principles. Not our principles, but the principles that Abraham Lincoln was just quoted as having said. Your president, our president, has never displayed those in the 4 years he's been president of the United States. He has allowed a little constraint on his worst inclinations. His desire for autocracy and his glorification of violence have not been tempered, but rationalized by those who sought to profit financially and politically from their proximity to power. Upon the foundations of virtue, reason, and patient wisdom laid down by George Washington as our first president, Donald Trump has constructed a glass palace of lies, fear-mongering, and sedition. Last Wednesday, on January 6th, the nation and the world watched it shatter to pieces. There can be no mistaking any longer the kind of man sitting in the Oval Office or his intentions and capabilities. The curtain has been pulled back. The office to which he was elected could not temper or reform him. Washington's legacy was passed down to us not as written decrees. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The gentleman's correct. The House will be in order.
Washington's legacy was passed down to us not as written decrees, but understood norms. How we ought to act, how we ought to conduct ourselves. Term after term, each occupant has observed those norms out of a recognition that our Constitution's articles are not the only preservative of our democracy. For more than 2 centuries, Madam Speaker, whenever those norms were tested and strained, good and virtuous citizens on both sides of the aisle found common purpose in reaffirming those norms. But memory fades, and from time to time it must be refreshed. Madam Speaker, as the framers emerged from the Constitution Convention, Benjamin Franklin was asked whether they had made America a monarchy or a republic. Probably all of us know this response. A republic, he answered, if you can keep it. That's the question today. If we can keep it. And the way we keep it is to say no to actions and words that do not promote the keeping of that republic. For millennia, people have understood that a republic is only as stable and lasting as the citizens and leaders who commit themselves to its upkeep. This president has shown us he's not committed to that project. His tweets every day have shown he is not committed to that project. Indeed, he openly disdains it and appears to prefer the alternative. But what of the rest of us? Those who have the honor and the great privilege and the weighty responsibility to represent the views of 750,000 of our fellow citizens. We in this Congress have an opportunity, no, a duty, to demonstrate our commitment, both as leaders and as citizens, to keeping America a republic. A republic that resolves its differences not through being ordered to come to the Capitol to prevent them from stealing the election, which was an absurd assertion from the very first day it was made. We cannot erase the last 4 years, Madam Speaker. We cannot turn back the clock, but we can look to the ideals and principles inherited from great presidents like Washington, like Jefferson, and yes, certainly like Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt, and from outstanding Americans like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Susan Anthony, Cesar Chavez, Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, our beloved John Lewis, and yes, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who taught us a lot about equality and inclusion. It's up to us to restore the vibrancy, Madam Speaker, of our democracy by reaffirming our commitment to the norms they passed on to us and entrusted to our care. But to make that possible, Madam Speaker, we must rise to this moment and not only affirm the virtues we cherish, but reject the vices we abhor. That's what I'm asking my fellow representatives on both sides of the aisle to do today. We all stood and we abhorred the violence that occurred and the threat to the very democracy that we hold so dear and swore an oath to protect and uphold. Reject deceit. Reject fear-mongering. Reject sedition, tyranny, and insurrection. Reject the demand for fealty to one man over fidelity to one's country. When I addressed the House during the debate over the articles of impeachment in December 2019, I said the following: we need not ask who will be the first to show our courage by standing up to President Trump. The question we must ask: who will be the last to find it? Senator McConnell, Representative Cheney, a number of other representatives who have spoken on this floor with great courage, Madam Speaker, because there is much fear of Donald Trump. There's much fear of Donald Trump's tweets. There's much fear of Donald Trump's retribution for opposition. In my view, Donald Trump demands absolute loyalty and gives none in return. I hope others will join Liz Cheney. I hope others will be honest with themselves and with their constituents. As Liz Cheney was saying, there has never been a greater portrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. Don't dismiss that. She is the daughter of a vice president of the United States who was the whip when I came to Congress. As she has taken a stand, I hope others will as well, Madam Speaker. Soon, the clerk will call the roll and ask for our votes. Make no mistake, this will be no ordinary roll call. This is about our country, our Constitution, and our democracy. These votes will be inscribed on the roll of history, a record of courage and of our commitment to country and Constitution, of our commitment to the rule of law and renewal of that which we inherited and hope to pass on, unbroken, unshattered. With just 7 days left in the president's term, this vote is not about timing. It is about principle and fidelity to our Constitution. It concerns the clear and present danger facing our country, not only in these final days of the Trump administration, but in the weeks, months, and years that will follow. It is about the necessity to demonstrate to this generation and to future generations the duty we share to protect our democracy every single day. Do not pretend, my friends, that it was simply those who came into the Capitol, encouraged by our president to stop the steal at any cost. And by the way, if the vice president doesn't do my bidding and follows the Constitution, sweep him away. We know that this president would never emulate George Washington and give up his power for the good of our republic, even after losing an election. Somebody talked about a peaceful transition. There has not been a peaceful transition. I don't know what you're talking about. You're not living in the same country I am. It was just days ago that the president, after committing this terrible act, thought he had to admit that Joe Biden might, yes, be president of the United States. We know that this president neither recognizes norms nor reflects the rule of law. We know that this president is not a patriot. So I ask this House, who among us, Madam Speaker, will be recorded on the roll of history for their courage, their commitment, the Constitution, and their country? We do this today not for politics. We don't need this for politics. Georgia showed that. There was no mistake in this election. We do this today to preserve and protect this great democracy. We do it for the America we love, our America the beautiful, whose founders' sacrifices we praise in song. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. Sadly, Madam Speaker, as our current president, the appropriate words would be, who less than self his country loved, and victory more than truth. Vote for this, for America, for our Constitution, for democracy, for history. I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 41, the previous question is ordered on the resolution. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. For what reason?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We'd ask for a roll call vote.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by an electronic device.
Less than 13 months since he was impeached the first time in December 2019, President Donald Trump is on the brink of being impeached again, this time for one article of incitement of insurrection for his actions before, during, and following last week's deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol. The article saying, in part, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a coordinate branch of government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. You can read all of that at cspan.org/impeachment. In this vote, expected to be a lengthy one with some 64 members requesting proxy votes, 57 actually for this vote. We expect 7 Republicans to likely vote yes in favor of impeachment, including just announced in the last few minutes, Peter Meyer of Michigan.
Seek recognition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Strickland of Washington pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Strickland will vote yes on H-Res 24.
Gentleman from California seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on H Resolution 24. And Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Costa pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Costa will also vote yes on H-Res 24.
Gentleman from Texas seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Crenshaw, Texas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Crenshaw will vote no on House Resolution 24.
Gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Custer of New Hampshire, pursuant to H-Res 8, I will inform the House that Ms. Custer will vote yea on House Resolution 24.
The gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Fleischman of Tennessee pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Fleischman will vote nay on H-Res 24. As the member designated by Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Desjardins will vote nay on H-Res 24.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Watson Coleman will vote yes on H-Res 24. And as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Series will vote yes on H-Res 24. And finally, as the member designated by Mr. Paul Tonko pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Tonko will vote yes on H-Res 24.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. LaTurner, Kansas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. LaTurner will vote nay on House Resolution 24.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Presley of Massachusetts pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Presley will vote yes on H-Res 24.
Does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Adam Smith of Washington State, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Smith will vote yes on H-Res 24.
I'll let them do this. Okay, you good? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Carson pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carson will vote yes on HRes 24.
What purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on HRes 24. As the member designated by Congressman Brendan Boyle pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Congressman Boyle will vote yea on HRes 24.
The gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Dr. Dunn of the state of Florida pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Dr. Dunn will vote nay on HRes 24. As the member designated by Mr. Buchanan from the state of Florida pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote nay on HRes 24.
Pennsylvania seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida 5th Congressional District pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform that Mr. Lawson will vote yes on H.R. 24.
This is the gentleman from California seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Michelle Steele, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Representative Michelle Steele will vote no on House Resolution 24.
This is the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bill Rackus of Florida pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bill Rackus will vote nay on HRes 24.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As a member designated by Representative Cardenas pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote aye on H.R. 24. As a member designated by Representative Kirkpatrick pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Kirkpatrick will vote aye on H.R. 24.
This is the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Young of Alaska pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Young will vote nay on House Resolution 24. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Baird from Indiana pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Baird will vote no on H.Res. 24.
This is the gentlewoman for Virginia seek recognition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on House Resolution 24. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on H.Res. 24.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bergman, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bergman will vote no on final passage HREV 24. As the member designated by Mr. Lamborn, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lamborn will vote no on final passage HRES 24.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Frankel pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Frankel will vote yes on HRES 24. As the member designated by Ms. Bonamici pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bonamici will vote yes on HRES 24.
This is a gentleman from Maryland seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Alma Adams of North Carolina pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Adams will vote yes on HRES 24.
Purposes the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Titus of Nevada, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Titus will vote yes on HRES 24.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. DeSaulnier pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. DeSaulnier will vote yes on HRES 24.
Does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Congressman Jerry McNerney pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. McNerney will vote yes on HRES 24.
Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Doyle will vote yes on House Resolution 24.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Vella pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Vella will vote aye on HRES 24.
Gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition.
As the member designated by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez pursuant to House Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez will vote yes on House Res 24.
purposes, the gentlewoman from New Jersey seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Schneider pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Schneider will vote yes on HRes 24.
Gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition.
As the member designated by Ms. Lee of Nevada pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lee will vote yea on HRes 24. As the member designated by Ms. Axney pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Axney will vote yes on HRes 24. As the member designated by Mrs. Dingle pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mrs. Dingle will vote yes on HRes 24. As the member designated by Ms. Capter pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Capter will vote yes on HRes 24.
Purposes, the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Deutsch of Florida, pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Deutsch will vote yes on HRes 24.
For what purposes, the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will vote yea on HRes 24.
Gentleman from Indiana seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Walorski pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski will vote nay on HRes 24.
purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Blumenauer, pursuant to HRS 8, I inform the House that Mr. Blumenauer will vote yes on HRS 24. As the member designated by Mr. Liu, pursuant to HRS 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on HRS 24. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal, pursuant to HRS 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on HRS 24. As the member designated by Mr. Peters, pursuant to HRS 8, I inform the House that Mr. Peters will vote yes on HRS 24.
There are 433 members currently of the House, normally 435. At that number, now 221 voting in favor of impeachment. The resolution passes the second impeachment of President Donald Trump. One article of impeachment on incitement of insurrection. There are 9 Republicans voting yes so far, including and led by the GOP whip Liz Cheney. There may be a couple of more, including we expect possibly Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, and there they tick off one more, 10, and Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin.
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on HRes 24.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Jayapal pursuant to House Resolution 8, I rise to inform the House that Ms. Jayapal will vote aye on House Resolution 24.
There you go. Here comes what's
any sort of joy or satisfaction to pass this vote? Absolutely not.
On behalf of this is Protocol Press Pool. This is what a pool can be. Put a pool camera right there.
Okay.
What was it like to have
It is a vote I believe many of us take with a heavy heart. To know that there was a violent and deadly attack on our capital that has not only traumatized the nation, but defamed our nation's capital. And to know that we have a sitting president that has, in word and deed, incited an insurrection and led a rebellion against our government has been really heartbreaking. And I knew as we were sheltering in the first moments that it was going to be important for there to be accountability for those actions. And without accountability, our nation cannot unite and cannot begin to heal. And I knew that we had to draft articles of impeachment. And I am proud to see my colleagues, not just on the Democratic side, but on the Republican side as well, join us in that effort. And I do hope, now that we have finalized impeachment on the House side, that the Senate also moves swiftly in removing a president that continues to present danger to our nation. Many of us have, I sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee, many of us have seen a attempted coups take place before. Many of us have written statements. Many of us have expressed desire for those nations to have what we have, and to now find ourselves in a position where we are looking for accountability on the attempted coup of our own government is, again, truly heartbreaking. And I know that history will look kindly on those of us who have decided to fulfill our oath of office in defending our nation against not only foreign but domestic threats, and will not look so kindly on those who have decided to cower in this moment, who have decided to choose party and their political viability and success over their country and over their oath of office. And so as someone who truly believes in restorative justice, I know that there is always room for repair. There's always room for healing. There's always room for unity. But a precursor to any of those things is accountability, is truth, and it's justice. And without any of those things, we will not be able to accomplish unity in this house. Thank you.
Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change a vote? Where's she coming from? No, can't go. On this vote, the ayes are 232, the nays are 197. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Congratulations. That's it. What now?
That's it. It's just being replaced again.
And everybody, what?
The chair announces that pursuant to Section 3A of House Resolution 41, the House Resolution 40 is hereby adopted.
Stop right here.
Stop after permanent.
Stop here.
The chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to Clause 11 of Rule 10, Clause 11 of Rule 1, in the order the following of the House of January 4th, 2021, of the following members of the House to the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
Mr. Schiff of California, Chair. Mr. Nunes of California.
Let me just check. Good. Hold on.
Pursuant to Section 5A 1B of House Resolution 8, the House stands adjourned until 11 a.m. on Friday, January 15th, 2021.
Another first for the presidency of Donald Trump. This is the second time in America.